welcome to part 3 of this video series, where we have created a hard hypnotic techno track from an experimental sound design session. And in this video, we're going to be bringing the majority of the track together, working on structure and mixing fairly simultaneously. We have recorded into the arrangement view, but we're for now just staying in the clip view to do the initial mixing. So just getting a good balance of the sounds before we dive in to the structure. A slight caveat to the everything from nothing ethos. We have already added 2 top loops from Driving Techno Essentials, and we will be adding a few more bits, mainly just 909 samples. 909 always works great with techno, and what we're doing here with the top loops is applying an auto filter and then using a downward LFO with a rate of 1, a little bit of resonance and a little bit of drive from the MS2 filter type. Doing this actually adds a little bit of low end, so we've put the EQ 8 afterwards and then just cut out that extra low end that it's generating, but it'll also just add a bit of body to the sound. The first one is on high pass and the second one is on low pass. So we have a little bit of movement in both loops, just adding a little bit of interest to the overall loop. As a general rule for mixing pretty much any type of music, and in particular most types of electronic dance music, we want to be really leaving the space of 100 Hz and below for the kick. So we're making sure that everything is low passed. Now we're just tweaking the 2 main musical elements of the track to get a nice call and response between the bass and the chord. As is often the case, just a little bit of trial and error, moving the MIDI notes around here. And what we end up with is the bass in the first half of the bar and then the chord in the second half of the bar. Previously, we mapped the filter frequency to the LFO, so just having a little tweak of that and kind of thinking about how it's going to work later on in the track. Just reordering the sends here, which is a nice new feature of Live 12, and then doing a bit of session admin, naming them appropriately. And now just shortening the note for the bass so that it cuts off and allows the chord to play on its own, achieving that nice call and response effect. Quite often we are working in solo, just focusing on certain parts at certain times. So here we are EQing the synth group. So this is all the synth sounds, just doing a little dip in the muddy area around 200 Hertz and just tweaking the chord a little bit more so it pops out in the mix. And again, just bringing different elements in and out in solo to make sure that everything's working together. Continuously checking the master is bouncing at around -6. Cool, so now we're flipping over to the arrangement view and just organizing and colorizing things so that they all make a bit of sense. So we've dragged out the core of the track to be around 6.5 minutes long, which will be roughly the length of the entire track. And then just dipping into some of the other samples that we created during the sound design session, and then using the high pass of EQ8 to create a breakdown. Quite often people will use the auto filter here. I just find doing it with the EQ8 sounds a little bit more natural. Worth noting that the auto filter actually only goes down to 26 Hertz, whereas the EQ8 goes down to 10 Hertz. So if you have an auto filter dropped onto a channel and it's activated, then you're potentially altering the sound, even though the parameter of frequency would be set to 0 or set to the minimum, it would potentially still be coloring the sound slightly. Just building out the structure here, so just removing things for the start and the intro, and a huge factor of creating interesting loopy music is to really utilize automation throughout the track. So we're starting that here with automating the filter frequency of the bass so that it opens up around the drop. And just regularly playing through and tweaking the automation as we go, so it's holding the listener's interest. Incidentally, to make the automation curves, you would hover over the automation line and then hold down Option or Alt and then click up and down to make a curve. Throughout the structuring process, we will be constantly dipping into the samples that we've created. Here we're making a riser and just adding some of that to the sends. So we have essentially lots and lots of unique sounds that we can use to help the transitions in our track. We are going to create a little drop, and what we've done is resampled the kick so we can do a reverse kick. So just resampling onto another channel, chopping it to one note, hitting R on the keyboard, and that reverses the audio sample. And we've just added raw there and cut out the sub. The reason the sub is cut out in this way at around 40 Hertz is to maximize the drop. So having that very low energy taken out means that when the kick comes back in, we feel the bass returning and ultimately it has more impact. And also just adding some processing to the horn effect that we put in during the last session. Again, cutting out the lows. Worth mentioning as well, pretty much any distortion and saturation type processing is going to add in low end to the sound. So very good practice to always put on a high pass after such processing. So just pressing B on the keyboard to go into draw mode for the automation and creating another small drop. Again, just dipping back into our sound palette, we organized by frequency or type that we expect we might use. So this one is another effect. And what we're actually doing here is using the transient shaper. So instead of the sample just playing, it is going to create kind of a sharp stutter effect. So instead of a sustained sound, Ableton is going to try and detect the transients. And the way we're using it here means that it's going to create kind of a bit of a hit effect here and there when the program feels like it's actually some kind of hit or transient. And we'll just add a little bit of extra interest to the sound. So here we've gone and grabbed a kind of atmospheric part. We've used chop and chain to give it some interest and some kind of rhythmical movement with the dynamics. So So you can see on the length here, it's 0.1.2, effectively creating a polymeter, and again, a little bit extra to help hold the listener's attention. So just taking a big chunk away there, we probably put a bit too much in at the start. We can always build it back in if we want to, and then just creating a small drop by highlighting an area and pressing 0 on the keyboard to deactivate the kick so it drops out just before the end of that phrase. Again, just utilizing the sounds that we created to generate a small riser effect, this time using the fades of the clip. So just added a new MIDI channel and renamed it 909, and we're just going to add in various 909 samples, the first one just being the Ableton stock. So this is actually the Selector Kit Warm, and I'm not sure whether this is the 707 or the 909 ride, but both work really well, classic sound for techno. So just starting with putting them on the downbeat. And then we're going to add in some extra ghost notes with a slightly lower velocity. And we're also going to utilize the chance feature and just reduce these last two so that they don't play on every. In fact, we're reducing all of the ghost hits so they just have a slightly less chance of playing. Adding in a snare fill now, and starting off by being a bit old school and duplicating it along, and then realizing we're in Ableton Live 12, extending the MIDI note across the clip, and then just using Command E on the keyboard to separate them all. Much quicker way to create a snare roll of this nature. And the samples we have here are from a forthcoming pack where we have recorded the Behringer RD9 through various circuits on the analog heat, and this drum rack track will be included in the pack along with several others, so already set up with lots of variations. So we have 16th note snare pattern, and then we are adding the random MIDI device, and it's on add and has chance of around 30, and that basically means that it's going to add random notes above our original note, and you can hear now it's starting to add some variation. We've used the velocity to add a bit of random velocity. Now we're mapping an LFO to the drive to give that kind of human feel. If you think about how a drummer might create a snare fill, often the hardness of the hits are going to vary. So that kind of replicates that kind of thing. So adding in a clap now, and the great thing about this selector kit is that it has multiple samples for each slot, so we can choose which ones sound good. So this sound, not a 909, but it worked well, so we have stuck with this one. And now doing a similar thing with a new 909 clap, this one again from 909 on Heat, and just playing a simple downbeat. And now we're going to group all of these 909 channels together, and we'll add the raw device, just going with a preset on this occasion, just to beef up all of our 909s. Do be careful when adding saturation to ride cymbals. It can alter the sound drastically and make them sound very crunchy. So happy with the sound and the flow in general, but we're just going to alter the structure a little bit. So when we select an area, we can use Shift and Delete or X on the keyboard, which will either delete or cut the time. So essentially just delete that section out of the timeline and just basically shortens up our intro and makes it a little bit more interesting. So just going to add another hit in to the clap pattern, again just keeping the interest. So duplicating the length, making them into ghost notes so they are a lower velocity, and adding some chants. And as mentioned, when doing this kind of processing, always a good idea to make sure that we're cutting out the lows after any added saturation or distortion. We've done quite a lot of work on the intro now, and we'll just have a listen through. Okay, so earlier we resampled the kick. Just a side note to that is that once we have got the resampled kick, we want to then keep that out of the group because the recording has been made with the group processing. So we don't necessarily want to add the group processing onto a sample that already has that processing on. So just building out the structure a little bit more here. So we've kind of teased in the intro all the 909, and now we're going to have a section where all of the 909 stuff drops in at the same time. When that comes in, some of the other drum and percussion elements are going to drop out. And then just cutting out a big block for the kick where we're going to make our first proper breakdown. More session admin here, and then reusing some of the samples for some interesting atmospheric effects for the first breakdown. So here we have grabbed the same sample we've used and then just gone to a different section of the audio, and now we've added 2 raw presets just for something a bit wacky, again cutting out the lows. So notice the transport isn't actually running at the moment, and that sound is being generated from raw itself. And we'll just add some delay and reverb using echo. And now we have a nice, interesting atmospheric sound to give some depth to the first breakdown. So quite often in this view, we are using the Z and X keys to maneuver around the session. Z to zoom in and X to zoom back out. And we're also using the H and W key so we can get a better overall view of our project. H will arrange the view aspect by height and W will fit in by width. So we can see the structure starting to come together now, and we'll just play through and get a bit of a feel for what we want to do next. So with the selector kit, the pitch of the ride sample is easily accessible on a macro here, and we're doing a classic technique of pitching the ride down before it comes out, and also experimenting here with a washout effect. Again, using audio from our pre-recorded sound palette to make another effect here. So we have chosen the section of audio, increased the gain, and a lot of the time with effects in terms of mixing, it's a case of just fitting them in where you can. And a lot of the time that will mean cutting out a significant amount of the low and mid frequencies, so they're kind of in the top area of our mix. Here we are just using the volume envelope to create a riser. Notice that the riser stops shortly before the end of the phrase. Having that tiny bit of cut off before creates a good element of tension and suspense before the next part drops in. So really starting to build up some depth and texture in the breakdown now, but there's certainly more that we can add. So again, just grabbing another part of the audio that we have previously recorded. And we'll create another small break here, and I'm color coding this here just as a visual indication that there will be a break at that point. So as mentioned, we have resampled the kick, and now we can quickly call on that to create some kick fills. And what we've done here is initially a double kick and then set the grid to be triplets, and it sounds like this. So the first half of the bar, it's a double kick, and then the second half of the bar, if you like, a triple kick. Experimenting with reversing, but we'll keep it as it is. It gives a nice kind of stutter effect. So up to now, we've been working on drums for a significant amount of time, and we've not really had the bass or synth in, but now we can start to build up the track a little bit more with this in mind. Again, diving into automation, we're using the envelope filter decay of the granulator in this instance. And just to give a bit more information with the granulator, you can't see it in this view, but the reason we went for this as opposed to a normal simpler, the idea was always to have like a one note chord, and using the granulator and the sample that we have, we can just add a tiny bit of variation to each hit by increasing the scanning on the granulator. And again, another technique to create interest in what is otherwise a fairly simple musical idea. So notice we have the envelope decay decreasing on the chord as the room reverb and also the filter increases on the bass. Just experimenting here with the horn effect, putting it up a few octaves. I think this was removed towards the end, but you can always experiment with such things. So for the breakdown here, we have the high perc grouped and then an auto filter with the frequency automated, so it starts to dull out the sound before it kicks back in. And then using the high pass of EQ8 to create that intensity of the drop. And then just creating a double kick for the drop, and we had the triplet grid left on, so we need to turn that off and then create our double kick for a bit more interest for the drop. So one thing I like to do quite a lot when I'm getting to this kind of stage is play the track through from the start and kind of build up a picture in my head of other things that might go on whilst I'm listening to the start of the track. Okay, and we've just appropriately named that channel Ride instead of 909. And just doing a very tight EQ cut here on the ride. So this is a very common thing to do with ride cymbals. If you make that particular cut too strong, you're going to take a lot of the character out of the ride. If you're making a slightly more minimal track, there is a creative choice to be made here. You might want to leave the main fundamental in, but because we've got quite a lot of other elements going on, it's a good idea to cut that strong fundamental of the ride so that it just sits in the mix a little bit better. So again, another section where the high perc group drops out and the 909 comes in. So again, just listening to the track and kind of building up an idea of what we'll do with the musical parts as the track continues on. More automation. Automation really is key. So, you know, getting used to dealing with automation, using Alt to create these curves is really beneficial for nice, smooth, natural movements. And yeah, we're getting towards the end of the structure here. We've already done quite a lot of mixing up to this point. There's a few more tweaks to be done, but we'll just let this play out and let you see kind of how we bring it together towards the end. And in the next video, we'll look at a bit more post-production, a little bit more mixing, and a little bit of the mastering process as well. it's all coming together quite nicely here. Notice that the bass drops out for the drop when everything else comes in. More automation lanes, so throwing the chord into the reverb. This really helps us create tension in the build-up. It's also a good idea to automate the reverb time on Ascend. It's not something we've done here, but it can be a very effective trick. And again, just tweaking the frequency so it gets to pretty much the highest frequency it's going to get to, then it drops down and the bass comes in, and that's also at the same point as the highs going out and the 909 coming in. And then what we're doing here on the sends is kind of an old school trick. It's like a throw effect. So pressing B on the keyboards, go into draw mode and just essentially putting the sends to the maximum for a very short period of time. This is really great for kind of dub delay kind of effects where it'll send one hit very strongly into the feedback chain of the delays and just create a nice kind of ambient texture in the background. So quite randomly here, just throwing things in for a little bit of extra interest. That's it for this video. I hope you found this interesting, useful, informative. If you did, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye now.
Where I just came from. They were able to trace and decipher my mouth in there 3 times.
And in the future.
Yes, and in the past. That's where I just came from not more than 2 weeks